The marble floors of the Kang estate had absorbed countless secrets over the years, but none quite like this one. On this particular night, behind the ornate mahogany doors of the master suite, a man who had made emperors tremble and nations negotiate fell to his knees before a woman who refused to look at him. "Just one night, please." His voice cracked like thin ice over a frozen river. "Give me just one night to prove that everything I did for us." Seraphina Kang stood at the window, her silhouette carved against the Seoul skyline, her reflection a ghost in the glass. She did not turn. She did not speak. Her fingers gripped the velvet curtain so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. What she did not know, what neither of them knew, was that 20 feet away, pressed against the wall of the service corridor, a young woman named Adiz held her breath until her lungs burned. The silver tray in her hands trembled, the evening tea threatening to spill. She had come to deliver refreshments as she did every night at precisely 9 o'clock. Instead, she had walked into the unveiling of a secret that would change everything. Kang Dorian, the most feared name in the Korean underworld, the man whose whisper could collapse financial empires and whose rage had toppled political dynasties, was crying. Actually crying. His broad shoulders, usually squared with the confidence of absolute power, now shook with the weight of something far heavier than guilt. "I know what you think you saw," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what they told you. But Seraphina, you have to understand." Understand? The word left her lips like a blade. She finally turned, and even in the dim light, Adiz could see the tear tracks glistening on her porcelain cheeks. "You want me to understand why our daughter is dead? You want me to understand why you chose your empire over our child?" The silence that followed was so complete that Adiz could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. A daughter. Dead. An empire. A choice. This was not the story anyone had told her when she had accepted this position 3 months ago. When the employment agency in Lagos had presented the opportunity, a well-paying domestic position with a wealthy Korean family, they had painted a picture of quiet elegance and routine comfort. They had not mentioned the armed guards who patrolled the grounds like shadows. They had not mentioned the whispered phone calls in the dead of night. They had not mentioned that her employer was the head of the Kang Syndicate, the most powerful criminal organization in East Asia. And they certainly had not mentioned that behind the perfect facade of this marriage lay a grief so profound it had turned love into something unrecognizable. Dorian rose slowly, his designer suit wrinkled from kneeling, his silver-streaked black hair disheveled in a way that would have horrified him under normal circumstances. At 52, he still carried the dangerous beauty that had made him legendary: sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of storm clouds, a jaw that looked carved from stone. But tonight, that legendary face was ravaged by an emotion Adiz had never seen in any man before. Desperation. "I did not choose my empire over Yeonjun," he said, and the name, their daughter's name, seemed to cost him physical pain. "I chose her life. I chose to pay the ransom they demanded, every last one of it. I chose to meet their conditions, every single one. And when they still," his voice broke completely, "when they still took her from us, I chose to hunt them down and make them pay with their blood. But you did not choose to be there." Seraphina's voice had dropped to something barely audible. "When she called for her father in those final moments, when she begged for you to save her, you were not there. You were in a boardroom in Tokyo, negotiating the expansion of your precious territory. Because they told me if I came, they would kill her immediately. They wanted me to suffer. They wanted me to know that I couldn't be the great Kang Dorian and save her at the same time. They made me choose, and I chose. You chose wrong." 3 words. Just 3 words, but they landed like bullets. Adiz felt tears sliding down her own cheeks, silent and unbidden. She should leave. She should retreat down the service corridor and pretend she had never heard any of this. But her feet had become roots, and her heart had become a witness. Because she knew something about loss. She knew something about choices made in impossible moments. And as she stood there, hidden in the shadows of this palace of pain, she realized that the story she was hearing was only half of the truth. Now, before we go any further into this story, I need you to do something for me. Type in the comments exactly where you are watching from right now. Let me know your location so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, this is your sign. Hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to take turns you cannot possibly predict, and you do not want to miss a single moment of what comes next. Seraphina walked to the vanity, her movements mechanical, her grace that of someone who had forgotten how to feel at home in her own body. She picked up a photograph, the only one remaining of their daughter, a beautiful girl with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's gentle smile. Yeonjun had been 17 when she was taken. She would have been 21 this year. Do you know what the worst part is? Seraphina asked, not looking at her husband. I could have forgiven you for not being there. Parents make mistakes. Life presents impossible situations. But you never told me the truth, Dorian. For 3 years, I believed you had simply been too busy. For 3 years, I mourned our daughter while hating you for your indifference. It was only last month that I learned about the ransom, the conditions, the choice they forced you to make. Who told you? The question hung in the air, sharp and suspicious. Seraphina finally met his eyes. Your brother. The name that followed needed no speaking. It lived in the tightening of Dorian's jaw, the sudden darkness that clouded his gaze, the way his hands slowly curled into fists. Jaewon. Adiz recognized that name. Kang Jaewon was the younger brother who managed the legitimate side of the family business, the hotels, the restaurants, the technology investments that made the Kang name respectable in the daylight hours. He visited the estate weekly, always charming, always solicitous toward the lady of the house. He brought flowers. He offered sympathy. He spoke of how different things would have been if he had been the one in charge that terrible night. And now Adiz understood something else. Something that made her blood run cold. Jaewon told you the truth, Dorian said slowly, each word measured and dangerous, but he did not tell you all of it, did he? He told me enough. Did he tell you that he was the one who informed the kidnappers of Yeonjun's location? Did he tell you that he was the one who negotiated in secret to ensure I would be in Tokyo when it happened? Did he tell you that the impossible choice I was forced to make was designed by him to destroy not just our daughter, but our marriage, our family, everything I have ever loved? Seraphina's face went white. Behind the wall, Adiz's hand flew to her mouth. You are lying, Seraphina whispered. You would say anything to. I have proof. Dorian reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope. Bank transfers. Encrypted messages. Testimony from one of the kidnappers who survived my vengeance long enough to confess everything. I was going to show you tonight, before you left for Paris tomorrow. Before you filed for divorce and gave my brother exactly what he wanted, control of this family and access to you. The envelope trembled in his outstretched hand. Seraphina did not take it. How long have you known? She asked. 6 months. 6 months. The words came out as a gasp. You knew for 6 months that your brother killed our daughter, and you said nothing? You let me mourn alone? you let me hate you? Because I wanted to be certain. Because I needed enough evidence to destroy him completely, not just in our world, but in the legitimate world he hides behind. Because I knew that the moment I told you, you would want to kill him yourself, and I could not risk losing you too. The photograph slipped from Seraphina's fingers and shattered on the floor. And in that moment of broken glass and broken hearts, Adiz made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. She stepped back, silent as a shadow, and retreated down the corridor. But she did not return to her quarters. Instead, she made her way to the east wing of the estate, where Kang Dorian kept private rooms for his weekly visits. She had been cleaning those rooms for 3 months. She had been watching. She had been learning. Because Adiz had her own secret. Her real name was not Adiz. It was Kayamika Okonkwo. And 17 months ago, Kang Dorian had ordered the murder of her father, a Nigerian diplomat who had stumbled upon the Kang syndicate's trafficking operations in West Africa. Her father had tried to do the right thing. He had gathered evidence. He had prepared to go public. He had been found floating in Lagos harbor 3 days before his planned press conference. Kayamika had spent the next year learning everything she could about the Kang family. She had fabricated credentials. She had paid her life savings to the employment agency to ensure her placement. She had come to this house with one purpose and one purpose only: revenge. But now, standing at the threshold of Jaiwan's private study, she realized that revenge could take many forms. And sometimes, the most devastating vengeance was not the blade you thrust yourself, but the truth you revealed at exactly the right moment. The Kang family history was written in blood and ambition, though the official biographies preferred words like determination and sacrifice. Kayamika had studied that history obsessively during her preparation, learning every name, every alliance, every betrayal that had shaped the empire she now walked through. It had begun 3 generations ago with Kang Sungo, a humble dock worker in Busan who had the misfortune of being brilliant and the fortune of being ruthless. The Japanese occupation had created opportunities for men who could navigate between official power and underground necessity, and Sungo had navigated better than most. By the time Korea was divided and chaos became the national condition, he had already built the foundation of what would become the most powerful criminal organization on the peninsula. His son, Kang Myung-woo, had expanded the operation into Tokyo, Hong Kong, and eventually the rest of Asia. He had also made the critical decision to invest in legitimacy, understanding that true power required both shadows and sunlight. Hotels appeared in Seoul. Shipping companies registered in Singapore. Technology firms established in the new innovation districts. By the time he passed the leadership to his eldest son Dorian, the Kang syndicate was more corporation than crime family, though the crimes remained as essential as the corporation. Dorian had been groomed for leadership from birth. He spoke 6 languages by the time he was 12. He could negotiate a hostile takeover by 16. And when his father's assassination by a rival organization tested his resolve at 24, he had responded with such swift and merciless efficiency that the words Kang and untouchable became synonymous. But Jaiwan had been born second. And in families like theirs, second was practically invisible. Kayamika thought about this as she moved through the East Wing, her footsteps silent on the imported Persian carpets. The estate was vast enough to feel like a small country, with each wing possessing its own personality. The main house reflected Seraphina's taste, elegant, restrained, beautiful in the way of museums. The south wing, where Dorian conducted business, was all dark wood and leather, intimidation made architectural. But the east wing, Jaiwan's territory, was something else entirely. Modern. Sleek. cold in a way that felt intentional. She had been in his study exactly 17 times over the past 3 months, always to clean, always during his absence. She had memorized the placement of every book, every photograph, every seemingly casual object. She knew that the third drawer of his desk had a false bottom. She knew that the painting of the Busan harbor concealed a wall safe. She knew that his laptop, always left charging in the same position, was protected by a fingerprint scanner that he believed made it impenetrable. What Jaewon did not know was that fingerprints could be lifted from the wine glasses he left on his bedside table. What he did not know was that Kayamika had spent 2 years before her placement learning the arts of covert entry from a former intelligence officer who owed her father's memory a debt he could never repay. Tonight, she did not need to be covert. The household was in chaos following the confrontation between Dorian and Seraphina. Guards had been summoned to ensure Mrs. Kang's safety, though whether they were protecting her from external threats or from her own husband remained unclear. The domestic staff had been dismissed early, sent to their quarters with firm instructions to remain there until morning. No one noticed a single maid moving through the shadows. No one ever did. Jaewon's study door was locked, but the lock was electronic, and electronic locks had vulnerabilities. 3 minutes of patient work with a device no larger than a credit card, and the door clicked open. Kayamika slipped inside, pulling it closed behind her. The room smelled of sandalwood and ambition. She allowed herself a moment to simply stand there, breathing in the scent of her enemy's private space. Her father had smelled of books and pipe tobacco, of Sunday afternoon laughter and Thursday evening prayers. He had been a good man in a world that rarely rewarded goodness. Jaewon had taken that goodness and drowned it. Focus, she told herself. The objective tonight was not revenge, not yet. The objective was information. Dorian claimed to have evidence against his brother, but Kayamika had learned long ago never to trust powerful men's promises, even when those promises aligned with her interests. If there was proof of Jaewon's treachery, she needed to see it herself. She needed to know the full scope of the monster she was hunting. The false bottom in the desk drawer yielded first. She had photographed its contents before but never had the time to truly study them. Tonight, with the household distracted, she could afford to be thorough. Bank statements. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, in Switzerland, in Singapore. The amounts were staggering, far more than Jaewon's legitimate salary could explain, far more than even a generous interpretation of performance bonuses could justify. She photographed each page systematically, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then she found the correspondence. Letters, handwritten on expensive paper, addressed to someone identified only as the architect. The handwriting was familiar. She had seen it on the notes Jaewon occasionally left for the household staff, passive-aggressive reminders about the proper temperature for his breakfast tea or the precise angle at which his bathroom towels should be folded. But the content of these letters bore no resemblance to domestic instructions. The Tokyo meeting is confirmed. He will be unavailable during the critical window. Ensure the package is secured before his return. The final payment has been transferred. No survivors. The investigation must lead nowhere. She suspects nothing. Continue the cultivation. When the time comes, her support will be essential. The packages. The payments. The cultivation. Kayamika felt her stomach turn as she realized what she was reading. These were not merely records of a single crime, the kidnapping and murder of Yeonjin Kang. These were records of a systematic campaign of betrayal stretching back years, perhaps decades. Jaewon had been undermining his brother's empire from within, turning allies into enemies, transforming strengths into vulnerabilities. The trafficking operations that had killed her father, the ones that Dorian publicly condemned but which continued to generate billions in revenue, those operations were not part of Dorian's empire at all. They were Jaewon's private enterprise, run without his brother's knowledge, designed to create exactly the kind of international attention that would eventually destroy the Kang syndicate's legitimacy. And when her father had stumbled onto the truth, Kayamaka found the order in the bottom of the stack. A single sentence, handwritten in Jaewon's elegant script: "The diplomat has become inconvenient. Resolve permanently." Her father's death warrant, signed with a casual hand. She should have expected the tears. She had prepared herself for this moment for over a year, had imagined finding exactly this kind of evidence, had rehearsed her emotional response in the mirror of her tiny Lagos apartment. But preparation was nothing compared to reality. Seeing the words, holding the paper that had sentenced her father to death, it was as if the wound had been torn open all over again. Resolve permanently. As if he had been nothing. As if his life, his laughter, his love for his daughter had been merely an inconvenience to be resolved. Kayamaka allowed herself 30 seconds of grief. She counted the breaths, 1, 2, 3, and forced her hands to stop shaking. There would be time for mourning later. There would be time for the full expression of her rage. But right now, she had work to do. The laptop came next. The fingerprint she had lifted worked perfectly, and the device hummed to life with a soft glow. Jaewon's desktop was surprisingly organized, folders clearly labeled, files systematically arranged. He was a man who believed in efficiency, even in his treachery. She found the surveillance files first. Video recordings of every room in the estate, including rooms that should have been private, bedrooms, bathrooms, private offices. Jaewon had been watching everyone, everything, for years. The recordings went back to before Yeonjun's death, capturing intimate moments between Dorian and Seraphina, private conversations between father and daughter, the quiet vulnerabilities that family life inevitably produced. This was how he had known. This was how he had orchestrated everything so perfectly: the timing of the kidnapping, the conditions that would force Dorian to Tokyo, the placement of suspicion that would slowly poison Seraphina against her husband. He had watched his brother's family like a scientist observing laboratory animals, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their breaking points. And then he had broken them. Kayamaka downloaded everything. Every file, every folder, every hidden partition she could find. The process took nearly an hour, during which she remained perfectly still, perfectly silent, barely breathing. The household sounds drifted to her occasionally: footsteps in distant corridors, the muffled sound of doors opening and closing, the ever-present hum of security systems doing their invisible work. When the download was complete, she restored everything to its original position with the practiced precision of someone who understood that survival depended on details. The false drawer bottom clicked back into place. The laptop returned to its charging position. The door locked behind her as if it had never been opened. She was halfway back to the servants' quarters when she encountered the woman in the hallway. Seraphina Kang stood at the window overlooking the West Gardens, still wearing the same black dress she had worn during her confrontation with Dorian, still carrying the same grief that seemed to surround her like a physical aura. She did not seem surprised to see a maid in the corridor at this hour. Perhaps she was beyond surprise. "You are the Nigerian girl," she said, her voice distant, almost dreamlike. "Adiz, isn't it?" Kayamaka nodded, careful to keep her expression neutral. "Yes, madam. I was just returning to my quarters. I apologize if I disturbed you." "You disturbed nothing." Seraphina turned back to the window. Nothing can be disturbed when everything is already broken. There was a moment, just a moment, when Kayamika considered revealing herself. The evidence she carried could end Jaewon's plot tonight. The truth about her identity could forge an alliance that would destroy their common enemy. But something held her back. Instinct, perhaps. The same instinct that had kept her father alive through 3 decades of diplomatic minefields, even if it had ultimately failed him in the end. "Is there anything I can bring you, madam?" she asked instead. "Tea, perhaps? Or something stronger?" Seraphina almost smiled. "Something stronger. Yes, I think that is precisely what I need." Kayamika nodded and retreated toward the kitchen, already planning her next moves. The evidence she had gathered tonight changed everything, not just for her revenge, but for the entire structure of what she had assumed to be true. Dorian Kang was not the monster she had imagined. Jaewon was far worse than she had known. And Seraphina, beautiful, broken Seraphina, was neither enemy nor ally, but something far more complicated. A victim, like herself. The question now was what to do with that knowledge. 3 days passed before Kayamika found her opportunity to act. During those 3 days, the Kang estate transformed into something resembling a war zone. Seraphina had not filed for divorce, not yet, but she had moved into separate quarters in the north wing, as far from her husband as the estate's architecture would allow. Dorian, meanwhile, had retreated into his office, emerging only for meals he barely touched and meetings with advisors who left looking increasingly worried. And Jaewon had arrived for his weekly visit, bringing flowers as always, sympathy as always, perfectly calibrated concern as always. Kayamika watched him from the corner of the dining room as she refreshed the water glasses no one was drinking from. He was handsome in that cold, calculated way that powerful men sometimes cultivated, every hair in place, every gesture considered, every word chosen for maximum effect. His suit probably cost more than her father had made in a year. His smile probably practiced in the mirror for hours. "You need to take care of yourself, sister-in-law," he was saying to Seraphina, his voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "This rift with Dorian, it cannot be good for your health. Perhaps a few weeks at the spa in Jeju? I could arrange everything." Seraphina picked at her breakfast without looking at him. "That is very thoughtful, Jaewon, but I think I need to be here right now. There are matters that require my attention." Of course, of course." Jaewon leaned back in his chair, radiating understanding. "I only want what is best for you. For both of you, despite how complicated things have become." The lie slid out so smoothly that Kayamika almost admired it. Almost. "Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever watched someone lie with complete conviction? Have you ever seen someone destroy lives while wearing the mask of compassion? I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and tell me, should Kayamika reveal what she knows now, or should she wait for the perfect moment? Your thoughts matter, and I cannot wait to read them. After breakfast, Kayamika followed her normal routine, changing linens, dusting surfaces, arranging flowers in vases that would be ignored. But her mind was racing through scenarios, calculating risks and possibilities. The evidence she had gathered 3 nights ago was secure, copied to 3 different encrypted locations that Jaewon's people could never access. But evidence alone was not enough. She needed a plan that would expose Jaewon completely while ensuring that she survived to see the outcome. Revenge, her father had once told her, is a meal best served with patience. She had been impatient in Lagos, and it had nearly gotten her killed. Within a week of her father's murder, she had confronted one of the men she suspected of involvement, a low-level shipping clerk who had been seen meeting with unknown foreigners in the days before the assassination. The clerk had played innocent, apologized profusely, promised to help her investigation in any way he could. 2 days later, her apartment had been firebombed while she was at work. That was when Kayamika had learned the first rule of hunting monsters: never let them know you are hunting until you are ready to strike. She had gone underground, changed her appearance, created new identities, spent months learning to become invisible. When she finally resurfaced as Adiz, a qualified domestic worker seeking international placement, she had been reborn as a weapon. Now, that weapon needed to find its target. The opportunity came that afternoon, when Seraphina summoned her to the private sitting room for a conversation that would change everything. "Close the door," Seraphina said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "And sit. I need to ask you something." Kayamika sat, keeping her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, madam. How may I help?" "You were in the corridor 3 nights ago." "It was not a question. When my husband and I were discussing matters." "You heard." There was no point in lying. Kayamika had survived this long by knowing when deception would work and when it would only make things worse. "Yes, madam. I did not intend to eavesdrop. I came to deliver the evening tea." "And you stayed because you could not leave without being noticed?" "Yes, madam." Seraphina studied her with eyes that seemed to see far more than Kayamika had expected. "You have been in this household for 3 months now. In that time, I have observed you carefully, as I observe all the staff. You are not what you appear to be." Kayamika's heart rate increased, but her face remained calm. "I am not sure what you mean, madam." "You move too carefully. You observe too closely. Your eyes are too intelligent for someone content with changing linens and arranging flowers. You carry yourself like someone who has known a different kind of life." Seraphina paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I was married to a spy before I was married to a crime lord, you know. My first husband was with the National Intelligence Service. He taught me to recognize the signs." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "My question," Seraphina continued, "is not whether you are hiding something. My question is whether what you are hiding poses a threat to me, to my household, or to my husband. And before you answer, I want you to understand that I am not asking as your employer. I am asking as a woman who has lost her daughter, who is on the verge of losing her husband, and who no longer has the luxury of trusting anyone at face value." Kayamika weighed her options rapidly. She could maintain her cover, deflect with innocent confusion, buy herself time to complete her mission without interference. But looking at Seraphina, at the raw pain in her eyes, at the steel that had somehow survived beneath the grief, she recognized something familiar. A woman who had been broken but refused to be defeated. "My name is not Adiz," Kayamika said quietly. "It is Kayamika Okonkwo. My father was Emmanuel Okonkwo, a senior diplomat with the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He was murdered 17 months ago in Lagos Harbor, on the orders of someone within the Kang organization. I came here to find out who gave that order and to ensure they paid for it." Seraphina absorbed this information without visible reaction. "And have you found what you were looking for?" "Yes." Kayamika met her gaze directly. "The man who ordered my father's death is the same man who orchestrated your daughter's kidnapping and murder. The same man who has been systematically undermining your husband's empire for years. The same man who has been cultivating your trust and your sympathy with the intention of eventually claiming both you and control of this family. Jaiwin. Jaiwin." Seraphina closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had changed in their depths. The grief was still there, but it had been joined by something harder, something colder, something that Kayamika recognized because she felt it herself. 3 nights ago, my husband showed me evidence of his brother's betrayal, Seraphina said. Bank records. Testimony from one of the kidnappers. I have spent 3 days trying to decide whether to believe him, whether this was all some elaborate manipulation to excuse his own failures, whether I could trust anything anymore. And now I find that a stranger in my household has independently reached the same conclusion. That she carries her own evidence, her own grief, her own hunger for justice. Seraphina leaned forward. Tell me everything, Kayamika Okonkwo. Show me what you have found. And then let us discuss what we are going to do about it. For the next 2 hours, Kayamika shared everything, her father's investigation into the trafficking operations, the evidence she had gathered before his death, her year of preparation, her infiltration of the household, and finally, her discoveries in Jaiwan's study. She showed Seraphina the correspondence, the bank statements, the surveillance files, the casual death warrant that had ended her father's life. And with each revelation, Seraphina's face grew harder, colder, more determined. He was patient, she said when Kayamika finished. I will give him that. Years of planning, years of positioning, years of waiting for exactly the right moment to destroy everything his brother had built. And he would have succeeded. If you had not been here, if I had not noticed you watching, I would have flown to Paris tomorrow. I would have filed for divorce. I would have eventually found comfort in the arms of the man who offered it so readily. You still could, Kayamika said carefully. Leave tonight. Take what you know to the authorities, let them handle it. You owe nothing to anyone in this house. Seraphina's laugh was bitter and brief. The authorities? Kayamika, you are new to this world, so let me explain something. The authorities in Korea are half owned by the Kang syndicate. The other half are owned by organizations that would love to see the Kangs fall. If I go to the police, either Dorian's allies will bury the evidence to protect the family name, or Jaiwan's allies will use it to destroy Dorian completely while letting Jaiwan escape. Justice does not exist for people like us. Only power. Then what do you suggest? Seraphina rose and walked to the window, the same window where she had stood 3 nights ago receiving her husband's desperate plea. My first husband, the intelligence officer, he taught me many things before he died. How to read people. How to recognize deception. How to survive in a world where everyone is an enemy until proven otherwise. She turned back to face Kayamika. He also taught me how to destroy someone completely. Not with bullets, not with evidence, not with the blunt instruments of justice. But with their own ambition. Their own arrogance. The very weapons they believed made them untouchable. What are you proposing? An alliance. Seraphina extended her hand. You want revenge for your father. I want revenge for my daughter. My husband, whatever his flaws, does not deserve to be destroyed by his own brother. And Jaiwan needs to understand that he has underestimated every single person in this house. Kayamika looked at the extended hand, elegant, perfectly manicured, attached to a woman who had survived horrors that would have broken lesser souls. Then she looked at her own hand, calloused from work she had never been born to do, scarred from the fire that had nearly killed her, strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical power. 2 women from opposite ends of the earth, connected by grief and rage and the unshakable conviction that some crimes could not go unanswered. She took Seraphina's hand. Tell me the plan, she said. The plan was elegant in its cruelty, which seemed appropriate given the target. Jawan's greatest strength was his patience, his ability to manipulate from the shadows while appearing supportive in the light. But his greatest weakness was equally clear, his absolute confidence that he was the smartest person in any room. He believed he had calculated every variable, anticipated every response, prepared for every contingency. He believed that Dorian was too focused on the criminal empire to see the betrayal within his own family. He believed that Seraphina was too broken by grief to recognize the serpent offering comfort. And he had never even considered that a Nigerian maid might be anything other than what she appeared. That arrogance would be his undoing. The first phase began immediately. Seraphina arranged a reconciliation with her husband, not complete, not warm, but sufficient to demonstrate that she was willing to listen to his explanations. Dorian, desperate for any sign of hope, accepted her overtures without question. He showed her everything he had gathered about Jawan's betrayal, and she pretended to be shocked by revelations she had already processed. But when he spoke of revenge, of the violent reckoning he had been planning for months, she stopped him. "Killing him solves nothing," she said, and her voice carried the weight of genuine conviction. "He will become a martyr. His allies will claim you murdered an innocent man to cover your own guilt. The organization will fracture, and you will spend the rest of your life fighting enemies he created. No, my love. We need to destroy him so completely that no one will ever question his guilt or mourn his fall." Dorian had never been a patient man. His instinct was always toward action, toward the immediate application of overwhelming force. But he had also never been a stupid man, and he recognized wisdom when he heard it. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "A trap. Baited with everything he wants most." The bait was simple, a complete breakdown of the Kang marriage, followed by Seraphina's apparent acceptance of Jawan's support and comfort. Over the next 2 weeks, she played the role of a woman slowly transferring her affections from one brother to another. She accepted his invitations to dinner. She confided her frustrations and fears. She allowed him to believe that his years of patient cultivation were finally bearing fruit. Kayamika, meanwhile, was given a new assignment. Seraphina introduced her to Dorian as a woman with her own reasons to want Jawan destroyed, without revealing her true identity or the full details of her father's murder. Dorian, to his credit, did not demand explanations. He simply nodded and asked what she needed. "Access," she said. "To everything. Your brother is careful, but he has made mistakes. I need to find them all." She was given security clearances, surveillance equipment, and, most importantly, the cooperation of Dorian's most trusted lieutenants. These were hard men, men who had killed and would kill again, men whose loyalty to the Kang family had been forged through decades of shared danger. When they learned the truth about Jawan's betrayal, their rage was palpable. "Let me handle him," one of them suggested, a former soldier named Taeyang whose scarred face spoke of violence barely contained. 20 minutes alone. He will confess to everything." "Confession means nothing," Kayamika replied. "We need him to condemn himself. Publicly, undeniably, in a way that cannot be disputed or explained away." "How?" "By giving him exactly what he wants." The second phase involved the annual Kang Foundation Gala, a glittering celebration of the family's philanthropic activities that brought together Seoul's most powerful figures, politicians, business leaders, celebrities, foreign diplomats. The event was scheduled for the end of the month, and Seraphina had historically served as its hostess. This year, she announced that she was too grief-stricken to organize the event, and suggested that Jawan take the lead instead. He accepted immediately, unable to resist the opportunity to position himself as the family's public face. What he did not know was that Kayamika had spent the previous 2 weeks preparing a very special presentation for the evening's entertainment. Embedded within the gala's sophisticated audio-visual system were files that would activate at exactly the right moment, files containing surveillance footage of Jaiwon's private meetings, recordings of his conversations with the kidnappers, and the correspondence that had condemned both Yeonjin Kang and Emmanuel Okonkwo to death. The evening of the gala arrived with the weight of inevitability. Kayamika stood in the kitchen with the other domestic staff, dressed in the same black uniform she had worn for 3 months, invisible among the caterers and servers who would circulate through the crowds. But she carried something different tonight, a small remote device in her pocket, connected to the presentation system, waiting for her signal. Seraphina swept through the ballroom on Jaiwon's arm, radiant in a gown of deep burgundy that made her look like a queen. She smiled at the appropriate moments, greeted the important guests, accepted condolences with grace and gratitude. And through it all, she kept Jaiwon close, encouraging his growing confidence that he had finally won. Dorian attended as well, but at a distance. He greeted guests briefly, then retreated to a corner where he could observe without participating. Those who noticed attributed his detachment to the marital difficulties that had become common knowledge. Those who knew better understood that he was coiled like a spring, waiting for the moment when he would finally have justice for his daughter. At precisely 9 o'clock, Jaiwon took the stage to deliver the evening's keynote address. He spoke beautifully, as always. He honored his parents' legacy, praised his brother's leadership, and paid moving tribute to the niece whose death had shattered the family. His voice cracked at exactly the right moments. His eyes glistened with precisely calibrated emotion. He was the picture of a devoted family member, a pillar of stability in a time of crisis. And so, he concluded, I want to announce a new initiative in Yeonjin's memory. The Yeonjin Kang Foundation for Child Protection will dedicate itself to preventing the kind of senseless violence that stole our beloved niece from us. Because no family should have to endure what we have endured. No child should become a victim of greed and cruelty. The applause was enthusiastic and prolonged. That was when Kayamika pressed the button. The lights dimmed unexpectedly. The massive screens that had been displaying the foundation's logo flickered and changed. And suddenly, Jaiwon's own voice filled the ballroom. The final payment has been transferred. No survivors. The investigation must lead nowhere. The applause died instantly. Heads swiveled toward the screens, where surveillance footage now played, Jaiwon meeting with the kidnappers, Jaiwon reviewing bank transfers, Jaiwon casually ordering the murder of a diplomat whose only crime had been discovering the truth. The diplomat has become inconvenient. Resolve permanently. Chaos erupted. Guests shouted questions. Security personnel rushed toward the exits. Journalists, always present at such events, began snapping photographs and recording video. But above it all, Jaiwon's voice continued its damning testimony, playing on loop as the evidence of his crimes filled every screen in the building. He tried to flee, but Dorian's lieutenants had anticipated that. Tae-young and 3 other men intercepted him at the service entrance, forcing him back toward the stage where the screens continued their merciless accusation. This is a setup. Jaiwon screamed, his polished facade finally cracking. This is fabricated evidence. My brother is trying to frame me. But even as he protested, more footage appeared, footage of him meeting with Seraphina in the weeks following her daughter's death, carefully manipulating her grief, planting seeds of suspicion about Dorian. Footage of him counting money in the same room where he had written the orders for murder. Footage that could not be fabricated, could not be explained, could not be denied. Seraphina approached him slowly, her burgundy gown trailing behind her like a river of blood. The crowd parted before her, sensing that whatever was about to happen deserved an audience. "You killed my daughter," she said, her voice carrying through the now silent ballroom. "You killed her to destroy my husband. You killed her to claim his empire. And then you spent 3 years pretending to comfort me while I died a little more each day. Seraphina, please. My husband wanted to kill you quickly. A bullet, perhaps, or a knife in some dark alley. It was what you deserved. But I convinced him that some deaths are too easy." She leaned close, her lips nearly touching his ear, and whispered loud enough for those nearby to hear, "So instead, you will live. You will live to face trial. You will live to see your crimes published in every newspaper in Asia. You will live to watch everything you ever wanted crumble to dust. And then you will spend the rest of your miserable life in a prison cell, knowing that you were outsmarted by the very people you thought were too broken to fight back." The police arrived minutes later, the honest ones, summoned specifically by Dorian's lawyers who had prepared warrants weeks in advance. Jaewon was arrested on charges of conspiracy, murder, and trafficking. The evidence provided was overwhelming, irrefutable, and meticulously documented. As they led him away in handcuffs, Kayamika stepped out of the kitchen shadows and watched. His eyes found hers briefly, and in that moment, recognition flickered across his face. He opened his mouth to say something, to make some final accusation or plea. But no words came. Because in the end, there was nothing left to say. The aftermath of the gala spread through Seoul like wildfire, and then beyond, to Tokyo, to Hong Kong, to every corner of the empire that Jaewon had dreamed of claiming. News outlets that had once praised the Kang family's philanthropic efforts now devoted endless hours to analyzing the stunning betrayal. Legal experts debated whether Jaewon's crimes constituted terrorism. Psychologists offered theories about sibling rivalry and narcissistic personality disorder. Tabloids speculated about Seraphina's role and whether she had known all along. Through it all, Kayamika remained invisible. She had not attended the gala as a guest, and her role in exposing Jaewon remained known only to Dorian, Seraphina, and the handful of trusted lieutenants who had helped execute the plan. That anonymity was deliberate. Her work was not yet complete. 3 days after the arrest, she received word that Jaewon had been denied bail. The evidence against him was so comprehensive that even his expensive lawyers could not construct a credible defense. He would face trial within months, and the outcome was not in doubt. The trafficking charges alone carried sentences measured in decades. The murders, Yeonjin, Emmanuel Okonkwo, and at least 4 others whose deaths had been tied to his schemes, added life imprisonment or worse. Justice, in the formal sense, was being served. But Kayamika had learned that formal justice was often insufficient. Her father's body had been returned to Lagos, where he was buried with full diplomatic honors. The Nigerian government had issued statements of condolence. The international community had expressed appropriate outrage. None of it brought him back. None of it erased the agony of knowing that he had died alone, in dark water, calling for help that never came. She needed something more. She needed to look into the eyes of the man who had destroyed her world and know that he understood what he had taken. The opportunity came 2 weeks after the arrest, arranged by Dorian through channels that Kayamika did not ask about. The visit was unofficial, unrecorded, and absolutely illegal. It was also, according to Dorian, the least I can do for someone who helped save my family. The detention facility was a gray concrete block on the outskirts of Seoul, designed to house the most dangerous criminals awaiting trial. Security was intense, armed guards, electronic surveillance, multiple checkpoints that verified identity through fingerprints and retinal scans. Kayamaka passed through them all with credentials provided by Dorian's people, credentials that would be destroyed the moment she left. The interview room was small, windowless, and smelled of disinfectant. Jaewon sat on one side of a bolted-down table, his hands cuffed to a metal ring, his designer suit replaced by a prisoner's gray uniform. Without his expensive grooming and carefully calibrated confidence, he looked smaller somehow. More ordinary. More pathetic. She sat across from him and said nothing for a long moment, simply studying the face of the man who had stolen everything she loved. "I know who you are now," Jaewon said finally. His voice had lost its cultured smoothness, replaced by something raw and desperate. "Okonkwo. The diplomat's daughter. My security people tracked your background after the gala. Quite impressive, how thoroughly you buried your real identity. Not thoroughly enough, apparently. Oh, don't worry. That information died with the men who discovered it. You will remain anonymous, I imagine. Free to walk away from all this and build whatever life you want." He leaned forward as far as his restraints would allow. "But I want you to know, I want you to understand that your father's death was not personal. He was simply in the wrong place, investigating the wrong operation. If he had minded his own business, he would still be alive." Kayamaka felt the familiar rage rising in her chest but kept it contained, controlled, channeled into something colder. "That is your defense? That murder becomes acceptable when the victim is inconvenient? My defense is that this world runs on power and ruthlessness, and the people who fail to understand that become casualties. Your father failed to understand it. My brother failed to understand it, until recently. Even my niece failed to understand it, though in her case, the failure was mine. I underestimated how much she would resist." He smiled, and it was a smile of pure ugliness. "She fought, you know. In the end. They told me she scratched and bit and screamed for her father. It took 3 of them to hold her down." The words hit Kayamaka like physical blows. He was trying to hurt her, she realized. Trying to poison her victory with images she could never unsee. It was the only weapon he had left. She refused to give him the satisfaction. "I came here to tell you something," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Not to debate morality with a man who has none. Not to hear your justifications or your cruelty. But to tell you, face to face, that you have lost." "Have I?" "Imprisonment is not death. Trials can be appealed. Evidence can be questioned. And I still have allies, still have resources, still have nothing." She cut him off with a single word. "You have nothing. Your allies have already abandoned you. I have seen the messages they have sent to your brother, begging for forgiveness, offering information in exchange for mercy. Your resources have been frozen by courts in 12 different countries. Your reputation, which you valued so highly, has been destroyed so completely that your name has become a synonym for betrayal. And my brother? Will he be merciful? Your brother will do what he has always done, protect his family and his empire. But your life, what remains of it, is not his concern anymore. It is mine." Jaewon's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Kayamaka reached into her pocket and withdrew a single photograph, the last picture ever taken of her father, captured 3 days before his death. Emmanuel Okonkwo smiled out from the image, his arm around his daughter, his eyes full of the warmth and wisdom that had defined his life. She placed it on the table between them. "For the rest of your existence," she said, "however long that may be, I want you to remember this face. I want you to understand that the man in this photograph, the man you dismissed as an inconvenience, had a daughter who loved him. A daughter who mourned him. A daughter who spent a year becoming someone else entirely, just so she could find you and destroy you." She stood, preparing to leave. When you are alone in your cell at night, when the darkness presses in and the silence becomes unbearable, I want you to understand something. You did not fail because you were unlucky. You did not fail because others betrayed you. You failed because you underestimated the power of love. The love a daughter has for her father. The love a mother has for her child. The love a husband has for his wife, even when that wife has every reason to hate him. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the handle. "Love is something you will never understand, Jiwon. And that is why you lost." The door closed behind her, and she did not look back. 6 months later, Kayamaka stood on the shore of a beach in Jeju Island, watching the sun set over water that seemed to stretch forever. The trial had concluded 3 weeks ago. Jiwon had been convicted on all charges, sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict had been covered by every major news outlet in Asia, celebrated as a victory for justice, analyzed as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power. Within days, however, the story had faded from headlines, replaced by the endless churn of new scandals and sensations. That was how the world worked, Kayamaka had learned. Even the most dramatic events became history faster than anyone expected. But some things endured. She had visited her father's grave before leaving Lagos for the last time. The headstone was simple, as he would have wanted, just his name, the dates of his birth and death, and a single phrase in Igbo, "Ihndo mere diabu." What he did was magnificent. She had wept there, alone in the cemetery, finally allowing herself the full expression of grief she had denied herself for so long. And then she had stood, dried her tears, and walked away. Not because the grief had ended, she knew it never would entirely, but because grief was not the same as being unable to live. Now she was building a new life, one day at a time. Seraphina had offered her employment in the Kang organization's legitimate businesses, a position that would use her intelligence and determination for purposes more constructive than revenge. Kayamaka had accepted, recognizing that the skills she had developed in the pursuit of justice could serve equally well in its protection. She was learning the complexities of international business, the nuances of diplomatic negotiation, the delicate art of wielding power responsibly. It was strange, sometimes, to think of herself as an ally of the Kang family. They were not heroes, not entirely. Their wealth derived from activities that could not survive too close an examination. Their power came from sources that respectable society preferred to ignore. But they were also, she had discovered, people capable of growth and redemption. Dorian had changed in the months since Jiwon's exposure. The ruthless efficiency that had made him feared was still present, but it was tempered now by something softer, a willingness to consider consequences, a recognition that some costs were too high regardless of the benefits. He had begun restructuring the organization's operations, eliminating the trafficking enterprises that Jiwon had secretly cultivated, redirecting resources toward businesses that did not require human suffering as their foundation. Seraphina had changed as well. The grief that had consumed her was transforming, slowly but perceptibly, into something that looked almost like peace. She visited Yeonjun's memorial every week, laying flowers and sitting in silence, but she also laughed again, smiled again, reached for her husband's hand without flinching. The wound would never fully heal, some wounds never did, but it was no longer bleeding. And their marriage, against all odds, was healing too. Kayamaka had witnessed their reconciliation in small moments over the past months, private glances exchanged across crowded rooms, hands touching briefly under dinner tables, whispered conversations that stopped when anyone approached. Whatever they had lost in the years of separation and suspicion, they were finding their way back to each other. The foundation of their love had survived betrayal and grief and rage, and now they were building something new upon it. She envied them, sometimes. And other times, she was simply grateful to have played a role in their survival. The sound of footsteps on sand drew her attention from the sunset. A figure approached along the beach, a young man she had met 3 months ago at one of the organization's business functions. His name was Eun-woo, and he worked in the legal department, managing the endless complexities of international compliance. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and possessed of a gentleness that seemed almost out of place in this world of power and violence. He was also persistent. 3 months of polite refusals had not discouraged his invitations to dinner, to concerts, to walks along beaches exactly like this one. Tonight, she had finally accepted. "I was not sure you would come," he said, stopping beside her. "I was not sure either." She continued watching the sunset. "I have not been available for this kind of thing for a long time." "I know." He did not ask questions, did not demand explanations. It was one of the things she appreciated about him, the patience, the willingness to let her reveal herself at her own pace. "But you are here now. That is enough." They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun finished its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Somewhere behind them, the sounds of the resort carried on the evening breeze, laughter, music, the ordinary joys of people who had not seen the darkness Kayamaka had witnessed. She would never be one of those people. She knew that. The experiences of the past 2 years had marked her in ways that could not be erased. She would always be someone who had looked into the abyss and survived. But survival was not the same as being unable to live. "My father used to tell me something," she said, breaking the silence. "He said that the measure of a person is not what they suffer, but what they build from the ruins." Eun-woo turned to look at her. "What are you building?" She considered the question seriously. What was she building? A career, certainly. Connections, relationships, perhaps even something like a home in this country that had once been enemy territory. A future that her father would have been proud of. "I am not sure yet," she admitted. "But I think I am ready to find out." He smiled, not the practiced smile of seduction, but something simpler, warmer, more genuine. "Would you like company while you look?" She thought of her father, of the love that had defined his life and that had ultimately cost him everything. She thought of Seraphina and Dorian, of the love that had survived betrayal and was slowly, carefully, being rebuilt. She thought of Yeonjun, a girl she had never met but whose death had somehow connected them all. Love, she had told Jiwon, was something he would never understand. It was the power that had destroyed him. It was the power that had saved everyone else. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to stop fighting that power. Perhaps it was time to see where it might lead. "Yes," she said. "I think I would." And as darkness settled over the beach and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, 2 people who had both known loss began walking together toward whatever came next. The story of the Korean Mafia boss and his wife had ended. But the story of Kayamaka Okonkwo, daughter, survivor, seeker of justice, was only beginning. If you have made it to this moment, to the end of this story, then I need you to understand something. This video exists because of you. Your views, your comments, your shares, they are what allow stories like this to reach the people who need to hear them. So if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember something important, please do not scroll away without doing one simple thing. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that justice is possible, that love can survive, that even the darkest moments can lead to redemption. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought, which character spoke to you, which moment stayed with you, what you hope happens next for Kayamika and the life she is building. Because every great story deserves an audience. And every person who watches until the end becomes part of that story's legacy. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And until next time, remember that the measure of a person is not what they suffer, but what they build from the ruins.